I'm looking at personally in terms of their capability to disrupt all industries over the next decade. So I've been telling you for years that the decade of the 2020s is going to be the most disruptive decade in history for all kinds of reasons. But from a technology disruption perspective, we're going to see massive disruptions. And so this is my framework, the technology disruption framework. And based on this, in 2014, I wrote a book called Clean Disruption of Energy and Transportation. Now, executive summary, there are 4 technologies: batteries, electric vehicles, autonomous technology, on-demand transportation, and solar, that all of them are disruptive in their own way, but together, the convergence of these technologies and business model innovations are going to be super disruptive for energy and transportation. So let me walk you through how that is going to happen and what I predicted starting 2014. So 6 years ago, this is the exact cost curve that essentially I put in my book, the projected cost curve of lithium-ion batteries on a $1 per kilowatt hour basis. And of course, at the time, mainstream analysts said, you're insane, it's not going to happen, and so on. Well, I assumed that it would go down at about 16% per year, and it's actually gone faster than that, faster. And you know, they said, no, it's not going to happen. Now, why is it going faster? Because over the last 6 years, the number of mega factories, the scale of this industry has gone berserk. There were 3 lithium-ion mega factories in the pipeline 6 years ago. Now there are 121. So the scale, the innovation, the new markets, and so on, essentially mean that the cost curve has accelerated to 20+% per year. So all my predictions are actually accelerating, which is great. And this is not just causing trauma, disruptions in transportation, energy. I mean, you probably have heard of the South Australia battery that is already disrupting the fossil fuel infrastructure there. So the wholesale market for services, essentially the battery, the Hornsdale battery, within weeks of being switched on, and with just 2% of the market, of the frequency control and ancillary services market, with just 2% of that capacity, it wiped out 90% of the revenues of the incumbent industry. 2% just within a few days. It wiped out 90%. This is what I call market trauma. So you don't need a big penetration. You don't need 20 years to essentially disrupt the finances of the incumbents. Now, grid batteries are super disruptive, both on the demand side and on the supply side. Why? Because our existing grid is extremely inefficient. It's an inefficient, just-in-time supply chain. So essentially, about a third of the assets in the existing central generation grid are peakers. And peakers are super inefficient. They can only be used a few hours, a few dozen hours. So batteries on the demand side or on the supply side can disrupt it right away. So this is a lot of billions of dollars that are going to be wiped out. And the disruption is from above. Essentially, first, ancillary services, then peakers, which is already happening, and then baseload, okay? And all of these assets are going to be stranded. Every new fossil fuel generation is going to be stranded. Even every existing fossil fuel generation is going to be stranded. And I predicted this years ago, right? So now all over the world, we're building far bigger grid batteries. And in fact, the market is saying, forget those natural gas peakers, those new natural gas peakers, we would rather put up new grid batteries. So disruption is already starting to happen. Now, when the cost curve of batteries essentially goes down the way that it has, yes, the grid is going to be disrupted. What else is going to be disrupted? The auto industry. So disruption number 2, electric vehicles. Now, this is a picture from 10 years ago. And the question is, as it was back then, is the electric vehicle disruptive? Or is it just a commie, greeny, conspiracy against the oil industry? And so let me walk you through some of the reasons why EVs are disruptive. One is that they are about 10 times cheaper to charge, depending on the market, right? 5, maybe 10 times to charge on a per mile basis compared to gasoline. 10 times. Every time you see a 10X, watch out. Also, EVs have so few parts, moving parts, maybe 20 or a few dozen, as opposed to internal combustion engines, which have thousands, 2,000, 3,000 moving parts. So essentially, EVs are almost free to maintain. They're at least 10 times cheaper to maintain, which is why EV companies can give you infinite mile warranty. Why? Because they can, because these things don't break. Now, one thing that has been ignored by the market is that, by mainstream analysts, is that EVs are not a one-to-one disruption. An EV can go 500,000 miles. An internal combustion engine, a gasoline or diesel car, can only go about 140,000 miles. So an EV can last 3 times longer than an internal combustion engine car. Now, Tesla and others have announced a 1,000,000-mile EV, which means that an EV can last up to 7 times longer than a diesel or gasoline vehicle. Now, we only drive about 10,000 miles per year, which means that we would need 50 years to drive an EV. Who has 50 years, right? Well, if you live in Cuba, you do, right? But fleets drive about 100,000 miles per year. So if you're a fleet over 5 years, you would need 1 EV or 3 ICE vehicles. So if you're a fleet, Amazon, FedEx, UPS, and so on, right now, it makes economic sense for you to buy an EV. And that's because over 5 years, it would be a lot cheaper. You would need 1 EV or essentially 3 ICE vehicles. Now, what about the cost curve of EVs? Again, this was the cost curve that I published 6 years ago. And I said, by 2020, by this time now, you will see the market is going to offer 200-mile electric vehicles. And I always thought that 200-mile was the minimum that you need for mainstream adoption. So by now, it would offer $30,000 EVs, which would be cheaper than the median new internal combustion engine car. So by now, and I made this prediction 6 years ago, buying a new EV, certain new EVs, not all of them, is cheaper than buying a new internal combustion engine vehicle. So for less money, you get 3 to 7 times longer range. You get to pay 10 times less fuel. You get to essentially have a car with no maintenance, car that's more powerful. What do you think the market's going to do? This is the moment of disruption, right? So if it takes another year, right, the tipping point, 2021, and I made that prediction a long time ago, 2021. The other thing that this map is telling you is this. By 2025 or so, you're going to have, the market is going to offer unsubsidized EVs with 200-mile range for $12,500 by 2025, which means that every new vehicle by 2025 will be electric. Every new car will be electric. Every new van will be electric for purely economic reasons. And that's by 2025, right? Every new vehicle, mainstream vehicle by 2025. This is not 2040. We're talking about 2025, right? And this doesn't include all the negative feedback loops. So I predicted also that the resale value of gasoline and diesel cars were going to crash. So when resale value crashes, that means that the monthly payments for your car are going to go up necessarily, right? And that is starting to happen. And you're going to see that happen a lot more. So pay attention to the plunging resale value of gasoline and diesel cars. And not only that, vans, buses, trucks, everything that moves on four wheels is going to be new, electric by 2025. And of course, the whole market for internal combustion engine automobiles will be wiped out by 2030. And this all includes a one-to-one. I haven't talked about the other elements, the real convergence that is going to make transportation just go into a big disruption starting next year, probably. So by next year or the year after that, I predicted by 2022, you're going to see $22,000 EVs with 200-mile range for $22,000. Now, what do we see now? Amazon fleet announced that they're going to buy 100,000 vans from Rivian, which is a new electric vehicle company. 100,000, starting when? 2021. So the tipping point is going to be 2021, as I predicted in 2014. And all of these, according to Amazon, are going to be hitting the road by 2024. Now, why Amazon? Well, again, fleet. They drive vans 100,000 miles per year. That means they need one van over 5 years or 3 vans if they're gasoline or diesel. So it makes total sense. Implications for the oil industry. Well, this is what I predicted in 2017 and what I predicted also in 2014. Oil demand is going to peak at about 100 million barrels per day, 2020, this year. And it's going to drop to 70 million barrels per day by 2030. Again, I was called insane. It's not going to happen. It's not. Oil demand is not going to go down by 30 million barrels per day. Well, guess what happened? Well, also, when it goes down to 70 million barrels per day, what happens to the cost? Well, the whole demand doesn't need to go down by that much in order for oil prices to crash. So my prediction was that oil cost in the world markets would go down to about $25 per barrel as soon as 2021, right? Again, even a few months ago, mainstream analysts said, not going to happen, right? That oil would go down to 20 or 25. Well, guess what? It already has. It already has. This is what we saw last week and this week. World demand went down to 70 million barrels per day because of another disruption, right? And cost of oil in the markets went down to 20. What I told you many years ago, right? If you paid attention to what I said, you may have saved money, right? Boom, $20 and minus $30 million demand already in 2020. Now, this is what happens when oil goes down to $20. Oil sands, gone, right? Stranded forever. Oil that can't compete at $20, at $25 in the market is stranded forever. Not just oil, refineries, pipelines that depend on those expensive oil, right? Offshore, deep water, gone. Shale, gone. You can't compete at 20 or 25, gone. Those assets are stranded. It's happening already, like I said. Not only that, it's even worse than what I said would happen. Over the last few days, oil went into negative territory. Zero, less than zero. People were paying for others to take oil off their hands. This was inconceivable just a few months ago. It's happening already. And this is the shape of things to come. This is the collapse of the oil industry. Okay? Now, it's going to recover temporarily, but this is what we're going to see soon. Minus 30 million barrel demand and oil prices at about 20 or 25, just like I predicted. Now, last but not least, I want to talk about the solar disruption. And I want to start in Denmark. And some of you may be from Denmark. But Denmark, Copenhagen, is 3 degrees south of Juneau, Alaska. It's not the place you would think of when you think solar. And yet, this school in Copenhagen generates 50% of its annual energy needs from solar energy. No excuse as to whether a place can generate at least 50% with solar. And solar, as you know, has decreased in cost by at least 400 times since 1970. I mean, it has a learning curve of about 22%. And it's going to keep going down. And at the same time, since the year 2000, solar has grown the installed base by about 460 times, which is about 38% per year. Now, that keeps growing, and it's going to be over sooner than, the disruption is going to happen very soon. But the question is, can solar continue growing at this rate? So let's step back and look at the solar cost trends versus conventional energy. Utility scale solar is already below 2 cents, depending on where you build it. 2 cents, 3 cents, 3.5 cents. Below 2, unsubsidized solar is below 2 cents. Qatar, 1.5 cents. Dubai, 1.7 cents. And it's still going down. Every time that a mainstream analyst says it can't go down anymore, it does go down. Where is solar now? Well, utility scale solar is cheaper than natural gas, coal, and nuclear already. Any new natural gas, coal, or nuke built today is gone, is stranded because it can't compete. In fact, solar with battery, with 4 hours of storage, is cheaper than the operating cost of coal, nukes, oil, or gas. Repeat, the total cost of solar plus 4 hours of battery is cheaper than just the operating cost of coal, nukes, oil, and gas. The disruption is here. It's over for all these fossil fuel and nuclear generation options. It's over. And I told you about GE. GE bet that it wasn't going to be over in 20 years. And because of that, we got a market trauma. GE destroyed almost $200 billion in market valuation, 74% of its market cap in less than 2 years, because it doubled down on thermal power construction. And supposedly this collapse caught GE by surprise. Well, hello, you should have listened to me, right? Coal already collapsed. This is the Dow Jones Coal Index, US Coal Index. Its market value of coal has already collapsed since 2008 by 99%. Repeat, in 12 years, the market valuation of the coal industry in America has dropped by more than 99%. It's already collapsed. Oil has collapsed. Coal has collapsed. Natural gas is on its way. Nukes, well, it happened already a long time ago. Over, people, gone. Now, a lot of folks talk about grid parity, and I already told you about it. 2 cents for utility scale solar, right? But is grid parity the tipping point? Well, let's talk about it. In China and in most cities around the world, commercial and industrial rooftop solar, unsubsidized, is already cheaper than grid, right? Than whatever you can buy electricity on the grid. Now, again, the experts had said that it would take decades for this to happen. And yet, in 344 cities in China, solar on the rooftop is already cheaper without subsidies than grid electricity. And this takes us to what I call God parity. God parity is the point of no return. So what is God parity? It's when the cost of solar rooftop generation on your rooftop, whether it's residential, commercial, or industrial, falls below the cost of transmission, not just the cost of that you buy grid electricity, the cost of transmission. Now, in some places, transmission is really expensive, 12 cents per kilowatt hour in places like Australia, right? So when you can generate for less than the cost of transmission, that means that even if the utility can generate at $0 per kilowatt hour, which of course is not possible, solar is getting there, but not quite zero. When you add the cost of transmission and of course, utility, CEO and salary and so on, it's never going to be able to compete with your own rooftop generation. That is God parity. So essentially, utility scale grid electricity will never be able to compete with your own generation. That is God parity. Mathematically, it's impossible for the utility to compete. And that's the tipping point. That, assuming regulation, allows solar to happen, which right now is the main challenge. Essentially, that's the tipping point. Anytime the cost of solar falls below the cost of transmission, that's the tipping point. That's when everybody's best selfish economic interest tells them to put up solar on the rooftop because of purely economic reasons. And we are here. A lot of places around the world are already below God parity. New builds, residential in California, in Australia. A lot of places are already. That's why, according to PwC, more than 2/3 of corporations are actively pursuing solar purchases. That's because of purely economic reasons. And this is a double disruption for nukes and natural gas and coal and oil and so on. So every factory, every warehouse, every building, every house is going to have solar and later batteries for purely economic reasons.